The Russian Tsar was a giant of spirit. However, he found himself in a situation that he had never thought of. The operation had truly failed, and while he was planning to raise all the Balkan nations against the Ottoman rule to crush the Turks, now he had to defend himself to the last drop of his blood. His army was closed in. In the center of the camp, the main artillery was placed. 35 cannons, mortars, and howitzers. 87 guns were located with the regiments in the gaps between the wagons. In total, there were 122 guns and about 46,000 men in the camp. Closer to the shore, the Russians put up their tents and the entire transport. The army's access to the water was open. 10,000 enemy forces on the other side of the river tried to cut the Russians off, but were terrified of the Russian artillery. On the evening of the 21st of July, although the Turkish artillery did not arrive duly, the battle began as the Janissaries moved forward. In a hurry, the first row of Janissaries gave a volley, and the rear ones fired at random. Then the Ottomans rushed to the top of the Russian triangle. The rear ones pressed so hard that the front ones could neither stop nor turn around. As at Poltava 2 years earlier, the decisive factor here was the Russian artillery. Their fire made many gaps among the enemy's ranks. There was no hand-to-hand fighting. The Russian firepower hindered the Ottoman forces to reach their lines and forced them to retreat. The first attack was followed by the second, and yet again this attack was doomed too. But the Russians, instead of taking the initiative and launching a counteroffensive, did nothing. Proving its superiority to the enemy in terms of infantry and artillery, the Russian army was victorious at the end of the 21st. The Turks lost at least 7,000 men. The fighting spirit of the Janissaries and the Turkish command was shattered. Only at about 10 p.m. Turkish cannons arrived and began firing. But the Janissaries lost the will to continue attacking the Russian positions. Before midnight of the 21st of July, Peter gathered another council of war. The enemy's cavalry could not completely block the Russian army and cut off the paths to the north, so it was decided to make a surprise attack at dawn. But after a short while, he took a step back. In fact, the enemy's frontal attacks had impressed the Tsar. The possible destruction of the army together with him, his wife, the field marshal and the Russian guard, all this could seem to the Tsar as a national disaster and the collapse of his reforms. Hence, Peter decided to try negotiating with the enemy. On the other hand, Baltaji was also frightened by what he witnessed in the fighting of the 21st. He lost confidence in his troops. Also, as he heard that in his back the fort of Brilo was captured by René's forces, he felt concerned about his communications. He assembled a war council, where Charles' supporters opposed the signing of a truce doggedly. But at the end, Baltaji signed the truce and the negotiations for a peace treaty began. The Russian Chancellor Shapirov was instructed by Tsar Peter to cede not only Azov, but also all the gains on the northern sector but St. Petersburg if it was necessitated by Baltaji. Moreover, if this was not enough for the Turks, Shapirov should have ceded also Russian Pskov. While Tsar Peter had not any clue of the capture of Brylov in the south, and this certainly affected his instructions to his chancellor, Baltaji also had reasons to bring a quick end to the war as he knew about the capture of Brylov. He set his own terms, which compelled the Russians to cede Azov and destroy the fortresses nearby, ensuring that they would not intervene in the Polish Ukraine and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth overall. Swedish interests in the region were not taken into account. Having listened to the claims, Shapirov probably breathed as he felt a relief and agreed. Yet the next day, the Russian Chancellor was informing his Tsar about the increasing demands of the Grand Vizier. This time, Peter instructed Shapirov to say yes to anything except the imprisonment. As mentioned in both Turkish and Russian sources, Shapirov promised a large sum of money to Baltacı, whose weakness to expensive gifts was well known by the Russians thanks to the espionage of their ambassador in Constantinople, Tolstoy. In addition to this, they reached a verbal agreement that the term for the return of Azov would depend on the deportation of Charles XII. On the 22nd of July, Shapirov brought to the Russian camp joyful news of the success of the negotiations. The Tsar felt a great respite. The next day, the peace was officially signed. Shapirov and the son of Field Marshal Sheremetev remained hostage to fulfill the terms of the treaty, and the Russian army moved northward to its borders. Charles XII, who left his camp happily upon the news of the encirclement of the Russian army, got frustrated when he heard about the peace negotiations. With his last hope to prevent the peace treaty from being signed, he swam the Pruth River, yet he was too late. He walked to the tent of the Grand Vizier and berated him harshly. The two had an argument, but it was too late to affect the course of the past war. By this time, along with the Crimean Khan Devletgiray, the Swedish king launched a propaganda to depose Baltacı. They claimed that he accepted to release the Russian army for a small price when he had a chance to destroy it completely. Having heard of those accusations, Baltacı wrote 2 letters to Valide Sultan, the mother of Ahmet III, in order to change the court's opinion in his favor. He defended himself with the words, "Did I cede Constantinople to Peter? You have seen many Grand Viziers, and which one of them was granted with such a victory by Allah?" Although there were voices in the Ottoman court lamenting the failure to dictate a much more demanding treaty to the Russians, the Peace of Pruth was rather humiliating for Russia. She was cut off from the Azov Sea and lost her fleet there. Peter's gains on the southern border were destroyed. The peace finally came, but it would last only a short time. Just 3.5 months later of the Treaty of Pruth, the Swedish king again started to encourage Ahmet III to begin a new war with the Russians. Peter, aiming to ensure that Charles was deported to Sweden according to the treaty, was deliberately delaying the cession of Azov. Yet, this proved an invaluable argument for King Charles to convince Sultan Ahmed. The situation was so dire for the Russians that Shapirov was warning the Tsar on a renewal of the hostilities in the spring of 1712. As Baltacı Mehmet Pasha was dismissed and succeeded by Ağa Yusuf Pasha, the Ottomans first wanted Peter to cede all the Ukraine, and then declared war on Russia. Peter, as he desired to focus completely on the Northern War, explained the situation to the Ottoman Sultan, telling him that the only reason was that they did not have enough time to evacuate the naval artillery. Finally, in February 1712, Azov was completely handed over to the Turks. Yet, this would not calm the Ottoman court. But as the preparations were poorly organized, they would make an armistice. However, this armistice would not last too long. The bulk of the Tsar's troops left Poland in June 1712, but a daring cavalry raid by the Charles puppet on the Commonwealth's throne Stanislav Lesinski's supporters forced some of the Russian forces to return for revenge. In November, again under the propaganda of the war-supporting party, Yusuf Pasha was sent into exile, and Süleyman Pasha became the new Grand Vizier. At the same time, Ahmed III declared that he would recognize only Stanislav I as the Polish king, and would recapture all of Ukraine by leading an army of 400,000 men under his own command. The Ottoman Empire declared war on Russia for the third time. Unlike in 1711, the Russian defensive strategy in the south was extremely cautious. In order to repel the expected Turkish invasion, a defensive line was built around Kiev. Also, an army almost as large as the one that fought on the Pruth had been assembled to defend the area. The Ottoman command realized the impossibility of a campaign in Ukraine and adopted the right strategy, without relieving the military pressure from the Crimean Tatars to obtain concessions from Russia. In April 1713, relations began to improve. The Russian ambassadors were released from long imprisonment. Finally, in June 1713, the third treaty between Russia and Turkey was signed. This was largely the same treaty which was signed as the second treaty last year, to be valid for 25 years. Decades after the Pruth Campaign, Frederick the Great of Prussia would ask the Ottoman envoy in Brandenburg about the lenient behavior of Baltaji Pasha to the Russians when he had a chance to acquire much more. Ahmet Resmi Efendi would have no answer but saying that the Ottoman Sultan was too merciful back then. Certainly, a great chance was wasted, and by exploiting this, Peter would keep modernizing his country and pave its way to be a dominating power, which would give much more trouble to the Ottoman Empire in the future. Thanks for watching our video on the Pruth Campaign. If you liked the content, give us a thumbs up and share it. Special thanks to the fellow channel Russian Eagles for his precious contributions to the research and text. See you next time.